It's View the Cruise Sunday. And so I want to talk about road trips. Striking out on the open road where great adventure and promise await. Now, the thing about road trips is that they can teach us so much about ourselves. And if we allow them to do it, a road trip can change us and transform our very lives. But they're not always easy. On a road trip, you have to be prepared for unexpected challenges, things like traffic jams or long, winding detours and maybe a flat tire or other hurdles. It's best, if you're going on a road trip, to have the kind of attitude where you are prepared, if you will, to roll with the punches. Now, in this Exodus story, chapter 17, we find the people of God, the Israelites, they're on the way. They're on a road trip, if you will. And their leader is named what? What's his name? Moses. Their leader is, whether he wants to or not, he is having to roll with the punches because he is in the hot seat. These Israelites are furious. And you know what happens when you're in a time of helplessness and powerlessness and you're not in control, we tend to lash out. We've got to blame somebody. And so in this case, they're going to blame Moses. And they're so mad at Moses that they want to stone him to death. Now, I know some of your imaginations are running wild right now. And I'm not going to invite you today to emulate that part of the story. And that's because these people are in what I would call their reptilian brain. They're panicking because of all this challenge and scarcity and uncertainty. And so they're doing one of two things that we humans tend to do. They're either going to flee or they're going to fight. And so they want to blame their leader in this case. And so the issue is life and death. The issue that they're dealing with in this stage in their journey is water. And they want to know what they're going to do. I mean, what are they going to do in this bone-dry desert with not a single drop to drink? And so they ask, why? They're asking Moses, their leader, why did you bring us out of Egypt? Which is slavery, by the way, captivity. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? Now, I feel sorry for these people because I've done a lot of hiking in the wilderness. I've done desert backpacking. I know what it's like to drink. Your final drink of water comes from a mud puddle that has like little insects in it. You got to have water, right? This is life and death. It's a matter of survival. I mean, they're in a desperate situation. No wonder they're grumbling. I mean, how long can you or I go without water? I looked it up preparing for today. And according to the internet, depending on the environment and our conditions and how much we're exerting ourselves or not, depending on how hot it is or cool, a human being can survive without water anywhere from 24 to about 120 hours. Life is short. In this barren environment, the people of faith, the people of God, their days are numbered. Now, as I've been meditating on this ancient sacred story handed down to us all week long, I haven't had basic survival on my mind. Now, I'm very well aware that there are people in our own community without food, adequate food and shelter and water, and we need to be praying about that and thinking about how God's calling us to respond to such things that are happening to people in our own midst. But for most of us who are here today or tuning in, our basic needs of water, food, and shelter are met or being met. So what's been on my mind as I've been reflecting on this Exodus story is the survival of the church. What the future of the church as we have always known it looks like. I mean, right before our very own eyes, our own denomination in this very conference is splintering. Right before our very eyes. But it's not just in our own denomination. The church in our country is on decline. I read several articles that talk about this this trend that is happening. And according to the Pew Research Center, the median congregation in 2023 is around 60 people. That's down from 65 just a few years ago. The Atlantic, one of you shared this article with me. The Atlantic reports that over the past 25 years, 40 million Americans have drifted away from the pews, marking the largest shift in church attendance in American history. Now, we in the church are quick to blame, and what we tend to do is we tend to blame ourselves. We lash out. We blame clergy misconduct and abuse and waywardness. Some of us blame those seminaries and how misguided they are. And some of us blame ourselves. Well, our congregations are just too uptight, not ours, of course, and too judgmental. So we come up with all kinds of reasons in the church for this significant decline, and we tend to blame ourselves. There's a recent book that these articles were talking about called The Great Dechurching. It's co-authored by two people, Jim Davis and Michael Graham. It's gotten a lot of press lately because it strikes a nerve. It's hitting home with us. And it's talking about how the deeper issue, he says, sure, these authors say they did a deep study on why this trend is happening, so many people not attending church anymore in our country. And after doing this deep research, what they discovered is, sure, the church has a role to play, but the deeper issue for this de-churching trend in our country is this, they say. It's just how American life works in the 21st century. Now, they were paying attention to the trends of people who are educated and live professional lives. This probably does not include the poor or the working class. This is people who have degrees and are considered professionals. And here's what's happened. These are people that make the decisions on behalf of this country. For many people in this country, our work and our professional financial successes have taken center stage. And one journalist says it this way, and I'm sure you get this sentiment. The challenge for many people is that our lives are so stretched, like a rubber band about to snap, that our church attendance ends up feeling like just another item on a checklist that's already way too long. And this is what we're up against, friends. People are busy, and we've been predicting this. Remember when we had Mike Slaughter and he was talking about, hey, you need to remember, church, they don't want more meetings, they want meaning. You remember him saying that? People don't have time for a superficial church where it's just another club to attend or something else to check off their list. And this is our new environment. This is our new terrain, whether we like it or not. And that's what brings up for me this idea of liminality. Let's revisit what that word means. I'm going to suggest to us as people of faith that we are right now in liminal space. We're on the way to something new. Something is emerging, and that's true on all levels of church, all across the world, in our nation, and I would say right here at First United Methodist Church at Gulfport. We're on the way to something new, but we are not there yet. And liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold, and it's a period of waiting, and it's a time of transition when you are literally caught between two different worlds. And you are leaving church. We have already left. We have left the tried and true and what we have always known and held dear to us. And we're headed for some new, not yet realized or understood reality. And this is a vulnerable place because it's so uncertain. And in this liminal place, you're not going to want to hear this, church. We lack control. We're not in control. And that's frightening. And that causes us to panic, flight or fight. And here's something else you need to know as I reflect on this ancient sacred story that we're called to reread as people of faith. We're called to place our lives in these stories. That's why they're there in Scripture. And what I was remembering today as I went this week, as I was in this wilderness with those wandering people of faith, is that the wandering, the liminal space lasts 40 years. And we have learned in this church that the number 40 means what? A long, long time. So this liminality is not going away anytime quickly. The great de-churching has been a gradual experience. It hasn't happened overnight. So our emerging into this new reality as a church won't happen quickly either. But we want quick fixes and we want certainties. And so what happens is we get back. Instead of remaining conscious and spiritually awake, we get back into that primitive brain. And there are people, and both of these are human nature, so no judgment. But there's people that get real rigid. You know, they want things to stay like they've always been, and so they get like really controlling, and they dig their heels in, and boy, they try to rearrange things or reframe things and fix it. There are people that are trying, and that's called the fight. And then there are people over here on another extreme that tend to be like, well, you know, love, peace, and togetherness. You know, there's nothing I can do about it, so let's just, chill out, right? And so we have these, some people call it conservative and liberal. And we're so polarized and torn apart because we're in a time where we feel like things are spinning out of control. And Walter Wink was this great theologian, and he used to talk about Jesus offers the third way. And it's not the fight way or the flight way, but we resolve this human chaos by staying with it. We stay in the chaos. See, there's a word called discernment, and discernment comes from a word that you sift for the gold, you pan for it until the gold nuggets, until the truth emerges. And I think that's what we're called to do. We stay with the tension, even when it's uncomfortable and uncertain. And the good news about liminality, when we hang with it and we don't fight or flee, is that liminality is where transformation happens. See, this is where we're being transformed and becoming more and more like Christ. And when we're in this stage of liminality, and we feel like our lives are going to be ripped apart and we're never going to make it, we're not going to survive, we're called to come back to these stories. So we go back and we revisit what happened to those people of faith of long ago that were wandering with Moses in the wilderness. And what we learn over and over at every stage in the journey is that where God calls us, God provides. Say that. Where God calls, God provides. Let me just remind you, you know the story. But at every stage, not in the way they wanted necessarily, Barry, but in the way they needed, God provided. You remember that Sunday you and Kathy were up in Oxford, and I was still in that church, and I just learned that I was going to be appointed here. I don't know if you were visiting Lizzie or what. I don't remember the gospel text that I preached on, but I remember that Rolling Stones song that I said. I gave the lyrics in that sermon. You don't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. And that's been proven to be true again and again and again in our time together here at First United Methodist Church of Gulfport. So God provided at every stage of the way victory over the Egyptians, parted seas, a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, daily manna. And in this particular portion of the story, God provides water from a rock. God tells Moses, go on ahead of the people. Now that's terrifying, but that's what leadership is. I want this church in a world spinning out of control to be a lead church. But what that means is terrifying. It means that we got to go out first. Leadership is about taking the first steps. And so God says to Moses, go on ahead of the people. And then God says something to Moses, very wise. Don't go alone. God says, take some elders with you. And what that means is wise people, strong people of faith that you can count on, that are trustworthy. Take some elders with you. And then God tells Moses to take in hand the staff with which he struck the Nile. And then he said, go. And then God says these powerful words, I'll be standing there in front of you. I am who I am, says God to Moses. You're not going to have to go alone. Hear that, church? I'll be standing there in front of you. God goes before us. And then strike the rock, and water will come out, and the people will drink. And my friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. This summer, I went on a road trip with Brandy Muir. Some of you know I went out west. It was a 3-week trip, and we drove out there. It was a road trip. And then we camped and hiked in Wyoming, Utah, and other places. At the end of our trip, we went to a place, we visited Zion National Park. It's just a beautiful, beautiful setting and park. But it was late July, and it was crowded, and the average temperature at that time of year in Zion National Park was anywhere between 99 and 116 degrees Fahrenheit. I kid you not. Well, Brandy was all excited. Personally, I'm a Granite Rock fan, but she loves Red Rock, and I think if you've seen one Red Rock, you've seen them all. But she was excited about this portion of the trip. I mean, you could just see it on her. And she had been researching, and one of the most popular hikes in Zion National Park is the Narrows. And she had acquired a permit, had been in some lottery. I mean, she'd gone to great length to make sure we could take this trip, this hike. Well, let me tell you a little bit about this hike in the Narrows. It's 18 miles, and you only get 2 days to accomplish it. And it is a canyon hike. And what that means, they take you up in a shuttle early in the morning, and then you spend all day and all day next day hiking down. And it's in a canyon, which means you're hiking in a riverbed. You're hiking in water. Now, I don't know if you've ever done any hiking, but hiking with wet feet, not much fun. And you cannot see beneath the water, so you don't even know where your feet are going to go when you pick them up and put them down, you know. And they're slippery. And they're unstable rocks, and they are, precarious. And I am not a big fan of this kind of hiking. I love to hike, but I am not a fan of this because I like to hike quickly. Not that I'm the fastest hiker in the world, but this is how I hike. I go at a fast clip, and then I rest. And then I go a fast clip, and then I hike, and I rest. And I like to climb. This was all downhill, and you had to hike slowly and deliberately. Otherwise, you ran the risk of spraining an ankle or even worse, breaking it. And so there were times, and by the way, you would cross, Mike O'Neill, you would cross the river, and that would take a while, and then you would hike a little bit, and then you'd have to cross again. So 18 miles really turned into around 20 miles. Slow, deliberate hiking. And it tried my patience. And I will tell you that there were some times I would have never, Brandy's just happy as she can be hiking away. And there were some times I would never have thought about taking one of those stones and throwing it at her. But I did at times grumble under my breath, and I thought to myself, why did I follow her lead here? What was I thinking? I thought I'd show you. It's just a 17-minute clip, and it's me. I didn't have my camera, but she had hers. And you're going to see, I think, you'll get a glimpse of my demeanor on this trip. Let's check it out. Not very fast. And if you could have gotten a close-up and seen my face, it was just like grimacing, Now, you may have noticed I was carrying a stick. Did you notice that? It was just a simple wooden walking stick, nothing special. The outfitter gave them out for free when you rented their shoes and other supplies. But that stick was critical. I used it the entire hike. I leaned on it. I would poke around to make sure the rocks were stable. It literally helped me keep my balance as I went around, as I hiked that uncertain terrain. It was my grounding force, and it was such a simple tool. just a piece of wood a little bit taller than my shoulder. I've been thinking about grounding forces as we're in liminal space, church. As we're in the in-between, like we're on our way to something new, whether we like it or not, and yet we aren't there yet. And it may be a long, long time. It may not happen. This new church that will emerge may not happen in our lifetimes or even our children and grandchildren's lifetimes. It's going to be a long journey. So what are our grounding forces? And I have two in mind that I want to share with you today, and then we'll wrap it up. Sound good? The first grounding force comes from the word of God, from the mouth of Cleo McQueen. What are you doing? What's keeping you calm on your way to surgery? You. And that's a healthy, stable, caring community. Now, there are a lot of churches out there, and we're not one of them. But there are a lot of churches out there that are not healthy, stable, and caring in the Christ-like way. They're toxic. They're arguing with one another. They're not a place of care and safety and belonging. And that's not true for us. We've had to work at it. We've had to pray about it. But I believe we are a healthy church. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily big or have tons of money. What it means, though, that Peter Bernheim has taught me, during the pandemic, he said, I'm not going to trust leaders unless they have the fruit of the Spirit. Well, I would say to you, if you're looking for a church, don't trust a church unless it conveys the fruit of the Spirit. Let me remind you what that looks like. Patient, kind, loving, peaceful, faithful, gentle. There's love, there's joy, and we practice self-control. You see, what I learned in this de-churching book, I didn't read it, I read about it. Here's what people are looking for. They don't want meetings. They don't want to just check something off the list through their church attendance. They want meaning and purpose. And so what people are looking for in a church, according to one article, in light of this de-churching book, they want friendship. They want spiritual practices to learn how to incorporate those, and they want to engage in outreach ministries. And those kind of churches are hard to find, healthy churches, because we're so polarized. People don't know how to spot them and find them. They're not looking like the church of the old, necessarily. And because we're so polarized and we have such strong differences, it's hard to be a church that's healthy and stable and Christ-like in our caring for one another. And what this book points out, these authors point out, is that churches that are healthy, stable, and Christ-like in their caring, they expect more from their members and not less. You see, what's happened is I call them latchkey churches, where the preacher's up here doing all the work and the staff, and the church is just saying, oh, that's wonderful. Look how faithful I am because of the staff and the clergy. But what we're finding is churches that are healthy and stable and Christ-like in their caring, they demand more from the laity. That's non-clergy. And it requires that we ask people to be more Christ-like, to lift the lowly, to care for the poor, and to champion those weakest in our surroundings. The second grounding force, I have a prop. I just can't help myself. Years ago, someone gave me a shepherd's staff. It's an ancient, age-old symbol of the church, Judeo-Christian symbol. And that staff, I looked up the word so you could know exactly what it means. A staff is a long stick, nothing fancy. It's just a long stick used as a support when walking or climbing. The staff in the Exodus story, it belonged to the shepherd Moses, but it pointed to God. It was a sacrament. Much like the sacrament of bread and wine. It was an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, reminding us that we don't go out there on our own. There's a source, we call it God, that goes before us. I am who I am. And that, my friends, is our inner anchor that will lead us through liminal spaces. Jesus, if you look at his life, he was always on the road. You might just say he was on a continual road trip. Some of his most impactful teachings and actions happened on the move while he was on the road. To know Jesus is to know him on the way. Think about the road to Emmaus, the Damascus road, and that road to Golgotha. And Jesus stretches his arms out wide, not just for conservatives or liberals, but for everyone and all. And he was placed on a piece of wood, just an ordinary stick. But because of his love, his radical love for all the world, we're all one day going to be restored. You see, we're all in liminal space all the time. That's what it means to be a human being. We come from God, we return to God. So in the meantime, what do? We turn to the one, the way, the truth, and the life, the one who will satiate our hunger and will quench our thirst. We turn to Jesus Christ, crucified and resurrected. And yea, though I walk through the valley of darkness, I will not fear, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, and thou preparest a table before me in the presence of all kinds of human challenges. But my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.